Hello friends, I am Shelley Clough and today we are continuing our string of Valentine's paintings with these cute little heart balloons. I'm super excited to show you how to make these. I will walk you through some supplies. You can use these as just a fun little Valentine's doodle, or you can paint them on the front and use them as a card, so totally up to you, but we will walk you through how to make these fun balloons. Okay, for supplies today, as always, I'm using my watercolor, what I call my starter palette. These are all Winsor & Newton colors. I have them all linked below in a swatch card if you want to see what colors I'm using. I also sell these exact palettes. If you want to be able to use exactly what I'm using, you can purchase that on my website for a little less than it would be to purchase all these tubes if you're just getting started. So that is all listed in the description box. For a brush, I'm going in with this size 6 Princeton Aqua Elite brush, and for paper, just sticking with Canson XL watercolor paper. I may also use a smaller brush later in the video, and I will make sure to mention anything I use as I go and link anything down below if it's something that you want to take a look at. Okay, so to get started, what we are going to do is I'm just going to wet my brush and we're going to dive in to one of these hearts. So the fun thing about these is trying to make them look a little bit 3D. And we are just going to start with a basic heart shape. So I'm going to start with this red colored balloon. And I'm going to do that by getting cadmium red and some alizarin crimson. So I'm just getting a few droplets of water from my jar onto my palette here, or onto the paint to wake up the paint. And then mixing these two colors till I have a red that I like. And I don't want it to be super concentrated. So I've added more water to the puddle a few times now, and what that's doing is helping to water down the paint so it's not quite so saturated. So it's a little bit easier for me to layer this balloon. So I'm getting that all mixed up, and then you can see I kind of bat my brush off a few times or even scrape it on the side here. That just helps make sure it's not too loaded up. So to start out, you just want to decide kind of where you're placing things. I'm just going to be kind of in this spot. This is going to be like a doodle page for me, but again, you can paint it as a card if you want to. So to start, I'm just going to make a heart shape, and maybe the hardest part here will be making the two halves of your heart kind of even. But the nice thing is, because it's all going to be filled in, we can tinker with the size of the heart after we paint it. So here's my initial heart. I'm just going to straighten out this side a little bit. And that actually feels pretty balanced. I'm okay with it. I think it's balanced enough for a balloon. Now I'm going to add some water to my brush, and with a more wet brush, I also picked up a little more paint. I'm just going to fill in this whole heart shape while it's wet. And again, this is just with a really light color of paint. And then I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm just going to lift a little bit of this color kind of in this top section here. I want to have kind of a swipe of highlight right there, and then one over here. Just going to press with this clean damp brush. See how that's lifting some color off? Just doing it a little bit away from the edge of the heart. And I can always add more color later, but I just want to lift a little bit of that before we get too far. So kind of along that top part, and we'll tinker with it more as we go. Now what I want to do is capture these edges that look kind of ruffled, where the balloons pinch up together. And so the way we're going to do that is with a slightly darker color. And I don't want a ton of water on my brush for this, so I'm being pretty light when I swirl in my pan here. And I'm going to go around this whole edge and just sort of zigzag my brush back and forth. So all it's doing is making kind of a little ruffly edge on my balloon. And I'm making some ruffles a little bit more pronounced than others, just enough so that it makes the edge of this heart a little bit textured. Okay, so now that we've done that, I'm going to take my brush with a little bit of paint on it. And now we're just going to run all along that inner portion with a slightly darker color. Okay, and then rinse my brush, and with the clean brush, just wiping that color out so that it blends all around. Okay, so this is where we're at. Now, while it's all still wet, I'm going to go right into my pigments here so that I have a much more concentrated puddle. And with that more concentrated color, I'm really going to focus on the edges. I'm really going to go back along kind of those zigzags. But because it's still wet, you see how it's creating this nice gradient here? That's what we want. And because it's still wet, it's just really easily sliding out to those kind of scratchy edges that we created before. I'm just going to do that one more time, a little bit more pigment. I want a really nice, rich pigment around these edges. That's where the darkest portions are. That's where it gets kind of shadowy, and then concentrating some right in that crease in the middle. Okay, so there's that. And I'm just going to take a clean, damp brush and make sure that this portion here is nice, smoothly blended out. And I still have kind of a lifting of color there. Now it still looks pretty funny, but when we let this layer dry, we're going to come back in with another layer, and that's where it's really going to come to life. Just making sure that whole section is kind of wet enough to talk to each other. So now while this dries, I'm going to move on to a second balloon. So the second balloon, I want to have offset enough from the first one that they're not going to touch at all. So on both of these, you can see this is my second balloon. I have them both offset so that they're not actually touching that first balloon at all. So we have a chance for that first one to dry while we're working on the second one. Okay, so now for our second balloon, I'm going to change the color a little bit. I'm going to go in with this pink quinacridone magenta. And again, starting a little bit lighter. And I'm going to get that initial heart shape. So I'm going to come over here and start out my heart. I'm trying to do it roughly the same size as the other one. And if they're a little different, that's okay. They'll just be like two different styles of heart balloon. You know, they don't all have to be exactly the same. Okay, so this feels pretty balanced to me. I'm just filling it in, kind of using water to spread that color around so that everything's all nice and wet. The paper is all wet there in the middle. I'm going to fix this curve just a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to take a more concentrated version of that quinacridone magenta, and I'm going to take that along my edges, making that little roughly kind of zigzag texture along the edges. It's almost making like a little lace trim or something for our hearts. Just a little bit of bumpiness. Okay, now that that is all on there, I'm going to rinse my brush so that I can take a clean, damp brush and sort of soften this whole inner edge. So that way the outer edge is staying kind of ruffled and scratchy looking, but this inner portion is smoothing out. And it's still giving me that nice deep gradient around the edge like we did over here. Okay, and then I'm going to lift a little bit of color, again, kind of in this top right segment here of this heart. And a little bit over here. It's pretty light, so it's not lifting very much, which is fine. And if you really struggle with lifting, I'll show you another option at the end where you can add a little bit of white gouache over this if you felt like your lifting didn't go very well. So now I'm just going to deepen up color in a couple spots. Like over here, it feels like it faded a little bit. Just going in with some pigment to make sure that's nice and deep. And then I want to get that kind of crevice in the middle there. I'm just letting those colors kind of soften, blend out into each other. All right, so I think that's going to be good for layer 1 on this second heart. Now we can go on to a third heart. And this third heart, because our second one is dry now, or should be about dry, our third heart we can sort of paint behind the first one so that we have some kind of dimension going on, like one balloon is behind the other ones. So for this third balloon, I'm going to go, so on this painting, I did sort of the red, the bright pink, and this one I made sort of a softer pink. So let's go ahead and try that. I'm going to take this Opera Rose color, scoot this palette over so you can see. Okay, so I've got Opera Rose here, and I'm just adding a good amount of water to that. I'm going to add some burnt umber. This is how I kind of tone down that color. It starts to get me a little bit more of a dusty pink. Do it a little bit at a time till you like it. You can also add, I'm going to add just a little bit of quinacridone magenta. But I think that's about what I want. So it's pretty light. I added quite a bit of water to this one. So I can deepen it up if I want, but it'll start nice and light. And so I'm going to place this heart kind of right around here. So I'm going to go in, make my curve here, and just sort of, let's do the other side first. Go down this way. Just like it's meeting up. And so see how these are kind of uneven right now? I'm just going to keep altering this line on the left until it feels like it's mirroring the angles of the right side. That's pretty close. Now we'll fill it in to see how we feel about it. And now when you're filling this in, the part you have to be careful of is just not painting on the red balloon. And if this is too tricky, you don't have to layer. You can just paint your next balloon somewhere else. We're just having fun here. Okay, so I'm going to lift that while it's still fresh. Again, just lifting a little ways away from the border on the top. Okay, now that we've got our inner portion kind of filled out, we are going to create that darker layer on the outside. So I'm just going in with those same colors, but adding a lot less water to them. Making sure to add brown, so it kind of tones it down. I think that's about where I want it. I'm going to take that color and make my little ruffly edges. Now that I've got my ruffles, I take that clean, damp brush and just I'm going to diffuse the inside portion of that line. And then I'm just going to make sure that that color didn't get too lost. I'm going to build it back up a little bit because what I want is just a little frame, like on both of these, there's maybe this one, especially like a 1/4 inch of that deeper color around the edges. That helps it give that rounded look that we want. Okay. So now that we've got the base layer done on all these hearts, we can go back and add layer 2. So if I come back to my red heart, I'm going to come back into this cadmium and alizarin mix. And what I want to do is I'm going to create a little bit heavier color in the middle here. And then we're also going to add some little detailing around the edges. So I'm going to come and sort of make like a swiping motion in here. Just a little bit here and there. And I want this shape on this side to be a little bit curved. I'm going to come up on this one. You can kind of decide how much highlight you want on each of your hearts. This one I'm actually going to just keep a little tiny bit, mostly fill that in. And then when it comes to these little edges, I'm just going to deepen this up a little bit more. Clean, damp brush, just sort of diffuse that out. Okay, now I'm going to let that bit dry, and I'm going to come and do the same thing over here. We're going to kind of swoop our brush, create a little bit. So what I want is it to be a little darker here and a little lighter around this edge. Okay, so I think I'm good with that. It might look kind of funny, but it'll come together. I might smooth it just a little bit here. And then we'll do it on this one. We're going to kind of swipe down this way. You want to move your brush sort of with the shape of the balloon. It will help to capture that look. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a tiny brush. So I have this size 2 silver black velvet brush. It has a really small tip on it. And what we're going to do is make these little flicks along the perimeter. And what that is the fabric of our mylar balloons kind of pinching and creating those wrinkles. And it really is going to help that sort of puffed up shape come out. So I'm going to get a nice dark alizarin crimson here, even with a little bit of Payne's gray, just to make sure it's a good shadow tone. I have not added very much water to it, so it's nice and concentrated. I want it to show up when I paint on top of these colors I've already painted. So I'm going to start at the bottom with some little flicks, and it's almost like I'm making little clusters, like little grass puffs or something. So I'm just making them angle out a little bit. And kind of make them a little sporadic, so do some and alternate the size of the gaps between them. If all the gaps are at the exact same spacing, it won't look as realistic. So just these little flicks here and there, a little bit curved. And I find it helps to find kind of where I dipped in a little bit. So like here, I came out and then I dipped in a little bit. I want to make those flicks where it dips in. Okay, and then just a little flick here and there. And then while I've got my paint here, I'm just going to get slightly less concentrated color and make my little kind of belly button or whatever here at the base of my balloon. Okay, now I can come and do it to my second one. I'm going to get that quinacridone magenta. I'm going to get a little bit of brown in it just to shadow the tone up a bit. And we're going to do the same thing. These nice little flicks with this tiny brush. You always want to make sure and do it at the base down here and at the crease in the middle. Those are two kind of more prominent spots where you're going to have those wrinkles. I'm going to add my little belly button thing down here. And now I can do it to my lighter pink balloon. Just going to mix a darker version of those colors. So I'm adding brown, opera rose, and some quinacridone magenta together to get that darker version, just adding less water and a little bit more on the brown side. And then we're going to start with these little flicks down here. Go ahead and make that little belly button while we're down here. Okay, they are coming to life. Now we're going to add, sticking with this skinny little brush, I'm going to come into Payne's Gray, and I'm going to make a kind of a light wash of that. I don't want it super dark, and I do want it really skinny. I'm going to make just little balloon strings coming down, so super thin little balloon strings coming down. And you could do these in fun colors too if you want, you know, pink or red or whatnot. Okay, so there's my balloon strings. Now, if you feel like you've kind of lost your highlight, so I feel like the highlight looks really nice on my red balloon. It's okay here. It's kind of missing here a little bit. So what we can do if we want is grab some white gouache. So again, gouache is kind of like watercolor, except more opaque. So I like to use this gram gouache. And I have some that I used earlier that I just squeezed into a little ceramic tray. And I'm just going to get that wet and kind of swirl my brush in there for a minute. When I'm using gouache, I want to make sure it's fairly concentrated because it will show up a lot better when I'm using it as a highlight. I want to make sure that I am using a concentrated enough version. So if I haven't just squeezed it out of the pan, like this is dried out gouache, so I really have to work at it for a minute to make sure it's pigmented enough for what I want. So swirling, tapping off my brush, and then I'm just going to add kind of a swipe right here, build it up on that side, and then I'm just going to make sure to do that on the other ones just to sort of make sure they all look similar enough. You can also do just like a little glimmer of white, like a little curve up over here. And just like that, you've got your cute little mylar balloons. Oh, one last step I added on some of these was some gold splatter, totally unnecessary, but if you've seen my videos before, you know I love it and will find any opportunity to use it. So I'm just going to grab one of these gold paints I have handy, swirl my brush in there. So I swirl until I have a pretty good little puddle of pigment loaded up, and then I swipe off my brush a little bit so my droplets are not too big. And then I'm just going to put my finger over the painting and tap my brush on it. So I'm going to tap, tap, tap. You can see we get that fun golden splatter. And it makes the whole painting just feel a little bit more fun and playful and magical. I'm going to do it one more time. And the more wet your brush is, the bigger your splatters will be. So if you feel like they're too big or too small, just adjust the amount of like how loaded the bristles are on your brush. If you've got a ton of water ready to drip off your brush, you'll get big splatters. If you wipe your brush off, you'll get smaller splatters. All right, we are all done. Thank you so much for painting with me. I hope you had fun with this cute little Valentine's tutorial. I would love to see your work. If you give these a try, go ahead and tag me on social media or find my Facebook group. And we will see you all in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.